Dr. Lisa Park rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the computer screen again. She had been working at the Deep Space Communications Array in Nevada for 6 years, but she had never seen anything like this before. The signal was strange. It was not like the normal space noise that came through their big radio dishes every day. "Kevin, come look at this," she called to her friend Dr. Kevin Walsh, who was drinking coffee at the next desk. Kevin walked over and stared at the green lines, moving across Lisa's monitor. The lines went up and down in patterns that looked too neat to be random. Space usually sent them nothing but static and empty noise. This was different. "That's weird," Kevin said, putting down his coffee cup. "How long has it been doing that?" "About 2 hours now. At first I thought our equipment was broken, but I checked everything twice. The signal is real and it's coming from deep space." Lisa pointed to the numbers on her screen. The signal was very weak and buried under layers of cosmic background radiation. Only their most powerful equipment could pick it up. Most radio telescopes around the world would miss it completely. "We need to call Tony," Kevin said. Tony Rodriguez was the best codebreaker they had. If anyone could figure out what the signal meant, it would be him. Tony arrived 30 minutes later with a bag of chips and 3 energy drinks. He was a thin man with messy hair who loved solving puzzles more than sleeping. When Lisa showed him the signal, his eyes lit up like a kid seeing presents on Christmas morning. "This is not random," Tony said after looking at the patterns for just 5 minutes. "Someone or something made this signal on purpose. Look at these repeating sequences. They're mathematical." For the next 3 days, Tony barely left his computer. He ate pizza at his desk and slept in his chair. Lisa and Kevin took turns bringing him more coffee and making sure he remembered to shower. The signal kept coming, and Tony kept working on it. On the 3rd day, Tony suddenly sat up straight in his chair. "I got it," he said, his voice shaking with excitement. "Lisa, Kevin, you need to see this right now." They rushed to Tony's desk. His computer screen was filled with numbers and symbols, but at the bottom was a message in plain English. "We are the last. Our worlds burn. The devourers consume all. This warning travels where we cannot. May someone, somewhere, hear our final words and learn from our failure." The 3 scientists stared at the message in silence. Lisa felt a cold chill run down her back. Kevin's coffee cup slipped from his hand and crashed on the floor. "This can't be real," Kevin whispered. "It's real," Tony said. "The mathematics don't lie. This signal came from somewhere far outside our solar system. Whoever sent it is trying to warn someone about something called the Devourers." Lisa picked up the phone to call their boss, but before she could dial, another signal came through. Then another. By the end of the day, they had received 5 more messages, all from different parts of the galaxy. All of them had the same desperate tone. "The destroyers come from the center. We could not stop them. Our defenses were useless. They consumed our moon in 1 day. If you receive this message, you must prepare. They never stop. They never show mercy." Each message was encoded the same way, using the same mathematical signature. Someone out there was broadcasting warnings across the galaxy, hoping that someone would hear them and understand. Dr. Lisa Park called General Patricia Hayes at Space Command that evening. General Hayes was a tough woman who had seen many strange reports over the years. She usually did not believe in alien messages or flying saucers. "General, we have intercepted what appears to be alien distress signals," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Dr. Park, we get reports like this every month. Usually it turns out to be signals from old satellites or radio interference from passing trucks. This is different, General. We have multiple signals from multiple sources, all using the same encoding system. The mathematical complexity is beyond anything humans have created. And the content..." Lisa paused. "The content suggests an immediate threat to all life in the galaxy." General Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "Send me everything you have. I'll have our experts look at it." That night, Lisa could not sleep. She kept thinking about the words in the message. "We are the last." Somewhere out in space, entire civilizations had been destroyed by something called the Devourers. And for some reason, humans had been able to hear their final warnings. The next morning brought more signals. Each one was more urgent than the last. The beings sending the messages were running out of time. Some signals cut off in the middle, as if the senders had been interrupted by something terrible. Tony worked around the clock to decode each new message. The picture that emerged was horrifying. The Devourers were not just destroying planets. They were consuming them completely, leaving nothing behind but empty space. They eat everything, Tony said, reading from his latest translation. The rocks, the water, the air, all life. They use it all to build more of themselves. Then they move to the next world. General Hayes called on the third day. Her voice sounded different, more serious. Dr. Park, we've confirmed your findings. Our best cryptographers and physicists agree that these signals are genuine alien communications. We're calling an emergency meeting. How soon can you and your team get to Washington? Lisa looked around the room at Kevin and Tony. They both looked scared but determined. Somewhere in space, civilizations were dying and sending out desperate warnings. By pure chance, or maybe pure luck, humans had heard those warnings. We'll be there tomorrow, General. As they packed their research, Lisa wondered if hearing the messages was a blessing or a curse. The aliens had sent their warnings into the dark, never expecting anyone to receive them. But humans had received them. Now the question was, what would humanity do with this terrible knowledge? Captain Jake Miller had commanded many ships in his 20 years with the Space Navy, but the UES Explorer was special. It was humanity's first real deep space ship, built with the newest engines and the best equipment Earth could make. His mission was simple but dangerous. Fly to the Kepler 4HFY system and find out where the alien messages were coming from. The journey took 8 months. Jake's crew of 45 people came from 12 different countries. They had scientists, soldiers, engineers, and doctors. Everyone knew this might be a one-way trip, but they all volunteered anyway. Dr. Amy Foster was the team's expert on alien life. She had studied every theory about extraterrestrial beings, but she never thought she would actually meet any. As their ship got closer to Kepler 442, her excitement grew stronger every day. Captain, we're picking up debris fields around all 3 planets in this system, reported Lieutenant Sam Johnson from his station. Sam was their best pilot and navigator. Jake looked at the main screen. What he saw made his stomach drop. The 3 worlds in the Kepler 442 system looked like they had been attacked by something terrible. The surfaces were black and burned. The oceans were gone. Even from space, he could see that these planets were dead. My God, whispered Dr. Amy Foster. What could do this to entire worlds? They flew closer to the second planet. It had once been covered with cities and green lands, but now it looked like a piece of burnt coal floating in space. The cities were melted into glass. The mountains had been flattened. Nothing moved on the surface. Wait, said Sam, checking his instruments carefully. I'm detecting some kind of structure on the surface. It looks artificial, and it's sending out a very weak power signal. That might be where the messages came from, Jake said. Dr. Foster, get your team ready. We're going down to take a look. The landing team included Jake, Amy, and 6 soldiers, led by Sergeant Bill Cooper. They wore heavy protective suits because the planet's atmosphere was mostly poison gas now. Their shuttle landed near what looked like the remains of a huge communication tower. As they walked through the ruins, Amy felt sick. The ground was covered with a strange gray dust that their scanners said was once living matter. Trees, animals, and people had all been turned into the same gray powder. Over here, called Sergeant Cooper. He was standing next to a hole in the ground that led to some kind of underground chamber. They climbed down carefully. Their lights showed them a room filled with damaged computers and communication equipment. Most of it was broken, but some machines were still working, powered by emergency batteries that had lasted for months. Then Amy heard something that made her freeze. It was a soft clicking sound, like insects talking to each other. She followed the sound deeper into the chamber. In the back corner, behind a pile of broken metal, she found them. 3 alien beings, each about the size of a human child. They had gray skin that looked like leather, large eyes that glowed faintly, in the dark and long, thin fingers that moved like spider legs. "Hello?" Amy said quietly, trying not to scare them. The aliens looked up at her. One of them touched a device on the wall, and suddenly Amy could hear words in her helmet radio. "You came," the alien said. The voice sounded surprised and hopeful. "We sent messages into the void, never believing anyone would hear them. You came." Amy's heart was beating fast. She was talking to the first alien being humans had ever met. "We heard your messages. We want to help. What happened here?" The alien moved closer. Through the translation device, Amy learned his name was Zelka. He had been a teacher before the destroyers came to his world. "We are called Zelari," Zelka explained. "For thousands of years we lived in peace. We built beautiful cities and created art and music. We studied the stars and shared knowledge with other peaceful worlds. We never made weapons because we never needed them." Zelka led them to a wall covered with pictures and symbols. The images showed a beautiful world with floating cities, crystal gardens, and beings like Zelka living happy lives. "Then the Devourers came from the center of the galaxy," Zelka continued. "They are not alive like us, they are machines, but they think and learn. They consume everything to build more of themselves." The pictures on the wall changed, showing massive black machines falling from the sky like metal rain. The machines looked like giant spiders made of dark metal, with long legs that could break through buildings and grab everything they touched. We tried to talk to them, to ask them to leave us in peace. But they do not talk. They only consume. In 3 days, they ate our entire moon. In 7 days, they had consumed 2 of our continents. Amy felt tears in her eyes as she listened. The Zelari had been completely helpless against the Devourers. They were artists and thinkers, not fighters. We had no weapons, no armies, no way to fight back. Our only choice was to hide underground and send warnings to anyone who might listen. We hoped that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a species that could do what we could not. Captain Jake Miller had been listening through Amy's radio. "Zelka, how many of your people are left?" "On this world, only we 3 remain. But there are other worlds, other species still hiding and still sending warnings. The Devourers move slowly, but they never stop. They will consume everything in their path unless someone finds a way to stop them." Amy helped the 3 Zelari back to their shuttle. As they flew back to the Explorer, she asked Zelka more questions about the Devourers. "They are ancient, older than most civilizations in the galaxy. For millions of years they slept in the galactic core, but something woke them up. Now they spread out like a disease, consuming world after world." "How many worlds have they destroyed?" Jake asked. "Thousands," Zelka replied sadly. "Entire species have been wiped out. Great civilizations that took millions of years to build were consumed in days. All of their knowledge, their art, their dreams turned into gray dust." Back on the Explorer, Dr. Amy Foster worked with Zelka to understand more about the threat. The Devourers were not just mindless eating machines. They were intelligent, and they learned from each world they consumed. They got stronger and smarter with every planet they destroyed. "The worst part," Zelka explained, "is that they use what they consume to build more of themselves. Every world they eat becomes material for a dozen new Devourers. They grow in number like a virus spreading through the galaxy." Jake sent an emergency message back to Earth. The situation was worse than anyone had imagined. The Devourers were not just a threat to 1 or 2 worlds. They were a threat to all life in the galaxy, including Earth. "General Hayes, we have confirmed that the threat is real and immediate. The Devourers are already destroying civilizations in the outer rim of the galaxy. Based on their rate of expansion, they will reach our sector in approximately 200 years. The message would take months to reach Earth, but Jake knew it would change everything. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they knew they were not alone, but they also knew that all life in the galaxy was in terrible danger. As the Explorer began its journey home with the 3 Zelari survivors, Amy looked out at the dead worlds of Kepler 442. Somewhere out there, the Devourers were still moving, still consuming, still growing stronger. But for the first time in millions of years, someone had heard the warnings, and someone was coming to help. Commander Steve Johnson walked into the biggest meeting room in the United Nations building in New York. Representatives from every country on Earth were waiting for him. The room was filled with presidents, prime ministers, generals, and scientists. Everyone looked worried and scared. Steve had been chosen to explain the situation because he was one of the few people who understood both the military and scientific sides of the problem. He had studied the reports from Captain Jake Miller's mission for weeks. Now he had to convince the leaders of Earth to take action. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to show you will change how we see our place in the universe, Steve began. He pressed a button, and the lights dimmed. A huge holographic display appeared in the center of the room. The display showed a map of the galaxy with bright dots marking different star systems. Green dots showed peaceful civilizations. Red dots showed worlds that had been consumed by the devourers. There were far more red dots than green ones. This is the current situation in our galaxy, Steve explained. Each red dot represents a world that has been completely destroyed by the machines we call devourers. Each green dot is a civilization that is still alive but sending desperate warnings into space. President Dan Cooper of the United States raised his hand. Commander Johnson, how do we know this information is accurate? We have physical evidence, Mr. President. We brought back 3 alien survivors who witnessed the destruction of their world. We also have video recordings of the dead planets in the Kepler 442 system. The threat is real. The French representative, Minister Claire Dubois, stood up. Even if this is true, these devourers are hundreds of light years away. Why should we be concerned? Steve changed the display to show the devourers' path of expansion. A red line moved slowly but steadily toward Earth's location in the galaxy. Because they're moving in our direction, and they never stop. Our best calculations show they will reach our solar system in approximately 200 years. When they arrive, they will consume Earth and everyone on it. The room exploded with noise. Representatives started talking loudly to each other in dozens of different languages. Some people stood up and pointed at the display. Others sat quietly with shocked expressions on their faces. Admiral Carol Wright, the head of the new Space Defense Force, stood up and waited for the room to get quiet. The beings who sent those warning messages failed because they tried to hide from this threat. They built underground shelters and hoped the devourers would pass them by. It didn't work. Every species that has tried to wait out this threat has been destroyed. She walked closer to the holographic display and pointed at the red dots. But humans are different. We've spent our entire history fighting for survival against impossible odds. We've survived ice ages, diseases, wars, and natural disasters. We don't hide from problems. We find ways to solve them. The representative from China, Dr. Li Wei, asked the obvious question. What exactly are you suggesting we do? How can we fight machines that can destroy entire planets? Admiral Wright smiled grimly. We do what humans have always done when faced with a threat. We prepare for war and we make sure we win. Steve changed the display to show Admiral Wright's plan. It had 2 main parts, and both were huge. Operation Lifeline has 2 objectives, Steve explained. First, we rescue every intelligent species we can find before the devourers reach them. Second, we build the largest military force in human history and prepare to fight a war unlike anything we've ever faced before. The rescue plan was led by Dr. Helen Price, who had organized disaster relief efforts all over Earth. She stood up and addressed the room. We estimate there are at least 50 intelligent species still alive in the path of the devourers. Each species has different needs. Some breathe different air than we do. Some need higher or lower gravity. Some eat different kinds of food. We have to build ships and shelters that can keep all of them alive while we transport them to safety. Dr. Price showed designs for massive refugee ships that could carry millions of beings. The ships looked like floating cities with different sections for different species. This will be the largest rescue operation ever attempted. We're talking about saving billions of lives across dozens of star systems. It will require every ship, every resource, and every person we can spare. Colonel Rick Barnes was in charge of the military planning. He was a tough soldier who had fought in wars on 3 different continents. When he spoke, everyone listened. The Devourers have never faced organized military resistance, Rick explained. Every species they've encountered has either tried to hide or tried to negotiate. We're going to do something they've never seen before. We're going to fight back. With everything we have. He showed weapon designs that had been developed specifically to fight self-replicating machines. The weapons were based on human military thinking. If you can't destroy the enemy, make them destroy themselves. Traditional. Weapons don't work on these machines. If you blow one up, it just provides raw materials for 2 more to be built. But we've developed something different. We call them entropy bombs. Instead of destroying the Devourers, they introduce chaos into their replication process. The entropy bombs would make the Devourers build flawed copies of themselves. The flawed copies would attack the original Devourers, causing them to fight each other instead of consuming planets. President Cooper looked around the room at all the world leaders. This plan will cost more money than humanity has ever spent on anything. It will require cooperation between countries that have been enemies for centuries. Are we really prepared to do this? The room was quiet for a long moment. Then the representative from Brazil, General Maria Santos, stood up. My country has been through many disasters, floods, fires, earthquakes. Each time we had 2 choices, give up or fight back. We always chose to fight back. I believe humanity should make the same choice now. One by one, other representatives stood up and agreed. The representative from Japan spoke about rebuilding after destruction. The representative from Germany talked about the importance of international cooperation. The representative from Nigeria explained how his country had survived famines and wars by helping their neighbors. Admiral Wright looked at the map of the galaxy one more time. The species out there sent warnings into the void because they had no other choice. They never expected anyone to hear them. But we heard them. And now we have a choice. We can hide and hope the Devourers never reach us. Or we can do what no other species has done. We can go to them, rescue the survivors, and fight back. President Cooper called for a vote. The decision had to be unanimous because it would affect every person on Earth. The vote took 3 hours because each representative wanted to speak to their home country first. When the final vote was counted, the result was clear. Every country on Earth agreed to support Operation Lifeline. Steve Johnson looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. They all looked scared, but they also looked determined. Humanity was about to attempt something that had never been done before in the history of the galaxy. Ladies and gentlemen, we have work to do, Steve announced. We have 200 years to save as many lives as possible and prepare for the biggest war in galactic history. Let's get started. As the world leaders left the meeting room, they all knew that everything had changed. Earth was no longer alone in the universe, but it was also no longer safe. The next 2 centuries would determine whether humanity would join the long list of civilizations destroyed by the Devourers, or become the first species to stop them. The age of humanity's greatest challenge had begun. Captain Beth Taylor stood on the bridge of her ship, the UES Mercy, and watched 1,200 human vessels spread out across space like a metal cloud. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever built. Each ship was different. Some were huge, cargo vessels converted to carry refugees. Others were fast scout ships designed to find survivors. Many were warships ready to fight if the Devourers appeared too early. This was the Liberation Fleet, and Beth was proud to be part of it. For the past 50 years, humanity had worked day and night to build these ships and train their crews. Now they were finally ready to begin the greatest rescue mission in galactic history. Captain, we're receiving the final mission briefings from Admiral Wright, reported Lieutenant Commander Paul Green, Beth's second in command. Beth looked at her orders on the main screen. Her job was to evacuate the Cathara species from the Vega system. Intelligence reports said the Cathara were insect-like beings who lived in huge underground cities. The Devourers were only 6 months away from their world. Paul, how many Cathara are we supposed to evacuate? Approximately 40 million, Captain. They live in 7 major hive cities spread across 2 continents. Beth whistled softly. 40 million beings in 6 months. It seemed impossible, but that was why they were here. Humans specialized in doing impossible things. The journey to Vega took 3 weeks. As they got closer, Beth could see that the Kythera world was beautiful. It had purple skies and silver oceans. The surface was covered with strange crystal formations that sparkled in the light of the Vega star. Dr. Matt Barnes was the team's expert on alien cultures. He had spent years studying the radio signals the Kythera sent to each other. When they landed on the planet's surface, he was the first person to try talking to the aliens. The Kythera were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They looked like giant ants, but they walked on 2 legs and had 4 arms each. Their skin was hard like armor, and their eyes were huge and multifaceted. They talked to each other by releasing chemical smells into the air. "This is going to be more difficult than we thought," Matt reported to Captain Taylor over the radio. "The Kythera don't just live in their hive cities. They are mentally connected to them. The cities are part of their minds. To them, leaving their hives would be like asking humans to cut off their arms and legs." Beth felt her heart sink. How could they convince 40 million beings to abandon everything they had ever known? Matt explained to them about the Devourers, show them what happened to other worlds. Matt worked with the Kythera for 3 days, using chemical translators and computer displays to communicate. He showed them pictures of dead worlds and explained how the Devourers consumed everything in their path. The Kythera leaders understood the danger, but they still refused to leave. "They say they would rather die in their homes than live somewhere else," Matt reported. To them, being separated from their hive cities is worse than death. That's when Master Sergeant Karen Lopez had an idea. Karen was an engineer who specialized in solving problems that seemed impossible. She had grown up in a poor neighborhood and learned to make things work even when they were broken. "What if we don't separate them from their hives?" Karen suggested. "What if we bring the hives with them?" She proposed building artificial hive cities inside the refugee ships. The artificial hives would use the same chemical communication networks as the real cities. The Kythera could stay connected to their community even while traveling through space. "It's crazy," Matt said, "but it might work." Working with Kythera engineers, Karen's team built portable chemical communication networks in just 2 weeks. The artificial hives looked like giant honeycomb structures made of metal and plastic. Each one could house 10,000 Kythera and maintain their mental connections. The first group of Kythera to try the artificial hive were amazed. They could still smell the community chemicals that made them feel safe and connected. They could still communicate with their leaders and their families. "It works," the Kythera queen told Matt through the chemical translator. "We can survive in these metal hives. You may begin the evacuation." Meanwhile, other human teams were working on different worlds with different species. Lieutenant Commander Paul Green led the evacuation of the Sultani, who were fish-like beings that lived in underwater cities. The humans had to build massive water tanks to transport 45 million aquatic aliens. Colonel Nancy Davis was rescuing the Luxari, who were made of pure energy and lived inside special crystal formations. Her team had to create containment fields that could hold energy beings without hurting them. Captain Roy Mitchell worked with the Praxis, who were like humans but had gray skin and could share thoughts with each other. The Praxis were the hardest to convince because they believed running away from danger was cowardly. "We have defended our world for 10,000 years, the Praxis war leader told Roy. "We will not abandon our duty now." Roy had to show them videos of what the Devourers had done to other warrior species. Even the bravest fighters in the galaxy had been unable to stop the consuming machines. "There is no shame in retreating to fight another day," Roy explained. "The goal is not to die bravely. The goal is to survive so your people can continue to exist." Each species presented different challenges, but human teams found creative solutions for all of them. They built special gravity chambers for species that needed heavier or lighter gravity than Earth. They created air systems that could produce dozens of different atmospheric mixtures. They even developed new kinds of food that could feed beings with completely different digestive systems. The hardest part was time. The Devourers were moving faster than expected. Captain Laura Hughes was leading the evacuation of the Vorthak, a species of crystal beings, when her scouts reported bad news. "Captain, Devourer ships have been detected at the edge of this system. They're 3 weeks ahead of schedule." Laura looked at her progress reports. Her teams had evacuated only half of the Vorthak population. There were still 20 million crystal beings waiting to be rescued. How much time do we have? Maybe 4 days before the first devourers reach the planet's surface. Laura had to make the hardest decision of her life. She could either risk her entire fleet trying to save the remaining Vorthak, or she could retreat with the beings she had already rescued. She called Admiral Wright on the emergency channel. "Admiral, we have a situation. The devourers arrived. Early. I can save half the Vorthak or I can risk losing everyone." Admiral Wright was quiet for a long moment. "Captain Hughes, how many beings do you have on your ships right now?" 20 million Vorthak, plus the crews from 17 other species we rescued from nearby systems. "And how many ships would you lose if you stayed?" Laura looked at her tactical display. The devourers were already consuming the outer planets of the system. Her ships were fast, but not fast enough to outrun the expanding wave of destruction. "Probably all of them, Admiral. We'd lose over 100 ships and 40 million lives trying to save 20 million more." "Then retreat, Captain. Save who you can. That's the mathematics of survival." Laura gave the order to evacuate. As her ships jumped away from the Vorthak homeworld, she watched the planet's surface begin to turn black as the devourers landed. 20 million crystal beings died because humanity couldn't move fast enough. That night, Laura sat in her quarters and cried. She had saved more lives than any human in history, but she still felt like she had failed. The next morning, one of the rescued Vorthak came to see her. The crystal being communicated by changing colors, and Laura's computer translated the meaning. "You mourn for my people who could not be saved," the Vorthak said. "But you should celebrate for my people who live because of your courage. 20 million of us exist because you came for us. Our children will remember the humans who heard our cries for help." Over the course of 2 years, the Liberation Fleet rescued over 300 million beings from 47 different species. They lost 36 ships and 8,000 crew members. But they succeeded in something that had never been done before in galactic history. Captain Beth Taylor looked at the final mission reports as the fleet returned to Earth. They had saved 300 species from extinction. Each rescued civilization brought their own knowledge, technology, and culture to help build something new. "Admiral Wright, this is Captain Taylor reporting. Operation Lifeline. Phase 1 is complete. We have successfully evacuated all accessible populations from the Devourer expansion zone." "Understood, Captain. Bring our people home. It's time for Phase 2. As the Liberation Fleet headed back toward Earth, Beth knew their work was just beginning. They had saved millions of lives, but the Devourers were still coming. Soon humanity would have to make their final stand, not just for themselves, but for every species they had rescued. The galaxy had learned that when humans heard a cry for help, they answered it. Now the galaxy would learn what humans did when it was time to fight. Admiral Carol Wright stood in the command center of the UES Defiance and looked out at the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. 2,000 ships stretched across space in perfect formation. Each ship represented 50 years of preparation, sacrifice, and hope. The battle would take place in empty space between the spiral arms of the galaxy, far from any inhabited worlds. Carol had chosen this location carefully. If humanity lost this fight, at least the refugee colonies in Andromeda would be safe. "Admiral, we're detecting the Devourer fleet approaching from Galactic Center," reported Commander Alex King, her Chief Tactical Officer. "Estimated arrival time is 6 hours. Carol nodded calmly, but inside her heart was racing. Everything humanity had worked for came down to the next few hours. They had spent centuries preparing for this moment. Now it was time to find out if all their planning and sacrifice would be enough. The enemy appeared on their long-range sensors first, as a dark cloud moving through space. As the cloud got closer, Carol could see individual shapes. Each devourer was the size of a small moon, black and angular like a metal spider. They moved with perfect coordination, never bumping into each other, never slowing down. "How many are there?" Carol asked. We count over 5,000 individual devourer units. Admiral, each one is capable of replicating itself using available matter. Carol felt a chill run down her spine. The human fleet was outnumbered more than 2 to 1, and that was before the devourers started making copies of themselves. Captain Jake Miller, now promoted to lead the fleet's scout division, reported from his position near the front lines. Admiral, the devourers are not responding to any communication attempts. They're treating us exactly like they treated every other species. They don't see us as intelligent beings. To them, we're just more matter to be consumed. That was exactly what Carol had hoped to hear. The devourers had destroyed dozens of civilizations, but every one of those civilizations had tried to negotiate or surrender. The machines had never faced an enemy that came to fight. All ships, this is Admiral Wright. You know why we're here. For the past 300 years, these machines have consumed entire civilizations without ever facing real resistance. Today, that changes. Today, humanity shows the galaxy what we do when innocent people are threatened. The first wave of human ships moved forward to engage the enemy. Carol watched as fighter squadrons led by pilots like Captain Lisa Chen and Major Ben Rodriguez flew directly at the massive devourer ships. The fighters looked like tiny insects attacking giant spiders. Traditional weapons were useless against the devourers. Lasers and missiles would only provide raw materials for them to build more copies of themselves. But humanity had developed something different. Deploy the entropy bombs, Carol ordered. Dr. Susan Clark had spent 20 years developing weapons that could turn the devourers' greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Instead of trying to destroy the machines, the entropy bombs introduced chaos into their replication systems. The first entropy bomb hit a devourer ship and exploded in a flash of strange purple light. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the damaged devourer began to build copies of itself, but the copies were wrong. They had extra arms in the wrong places, or missing parts that made them unable to function properly. The flawed copies didn't know they were broken. They thought the original devourer was the one with the problem, so they attacked it. Within minutes, the damaged devourer and its flawed copies were fighting each other, instead of attacking human ships. "It's working," shouted Commander King. "The entropy effect is spreading to nearby devourer units." But the devourers learned fast. The machines that hadn't been hit by entropy bombs began to adapt. They changed their formation and started attacking the human ships with new tactics. The battle turned into a nightmare of metal and fire. Human ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Devourer machines tore themselves apart in mechanical fury. The space between the spiral arms became a graveyard of twisted metal and drifting debris. Captain Sarah Kim led a desperate attack on a cluster of devourer ships that were trying to break through the human lines. Her ship, the UES Courage, was hit by 3 different devourer weapons, but she kept fighting. "Admiral, we can't hold this position much longer," Sarah reported, her voice strained. "We're losing too many ships." Carol looked at her tactical display. The battle had been going on for 12 hours, and humanity was losing. They had destroyed or disabled over 1,000 devourer ships, but the machines kept building new ones faster than humans could stop them. Then Commander King noticed something strange on his sensors. "Admiral, the devourers are doing something new. They're pulling back to a central formation." Carol watched as the surviving devourer ships moved into a tight cluster in the center of the battlefield. They seemed to be connecting to each other with streams of energy. "They're trying to merge into a single massive unit," reported Dr. Clark from her science station. "If they succeed, we won't be able to stop them." Carol realized this was humanity's last chance. If the devourers successfully merged, they would become an unstoppable force that could consume the entire galaxy. "All ships, this is Admiral Wright. The enemy is attempting to consolidate into a super unit. We're going to stop them. The same way humanity has always solved impossible problems. We're going to do something crazy that shouldn't work, but somehow does." Carol ordered every remaining human ship to charge directly at the merging devourers. It looked like suicide, but it was the only way to prevent the machines from completing their combination. Captain Jake Miller led the charge with his ship, the UES Explorer 2. Behind him came hundreds of human vessels, their crews ready to sacrifice everything to stop the ancient enemy. The human ships crashed into the Devourer formation like a wave hitting a wall. Ships on both sides exploded in massive fireballs. But the human attack disrupted the Devourer's merging process, causing the half-combined machines to tear themselves apart. "Now!" Carol shouted. "Hit them with everything we have!" The surviving human ships fired every entropy bomb, every plasma torpedo, and every quantum missile they had left. The space around the Devourer formation lit up like a new star being born. When the light faded, the Devourer fleet was scattered and broken. Some machines were still functional, but they were no longer coordinated. They attacked each other as much as they attacked the human ships. For the first time in millions of years, the Devourers had been defeated in battle. The battle lasted 18 hours total. When it ended, humanity had lost over half their fleet. 800 ships and 40,000 crew members were gone forever. But the Devourer threat was broken. Carol stood in the ruins of her command center and looked out at the aftermath. Pieces of destroyed ships drifted through space like metal snow. The surviving Devourer units were fleeing back toward the galactic core, damaged and no longer able to work together effectively. 3 days later, as rescue ships collected survivors from the battlefield, Zelka of the Zalari came to see Admiral Wright. The old alien had lived to see something he never thought possible. "Why did you come for us?" Zelka asked through his translation device. "Your species barely knew we existed. You could have hidden on your world and hoped the Devourers would never find you. Why did you risk everything to save strangers?" Carol looked at the alien who had survived the destruction of his entire world. She thought about all the species humanity had rescued, all the lives that had been saved, all the civilizations that would continue to exist because humans had heard their cry for help. "Because someone had to," Carol said simply. "Because when you're in trouble and you call for help, humans don't ask if you deserve it. We ask how fast we can get there." Captain Jake Miller, wounded but alive, added his own thoughts. For millions of years, the galaxy was ruled by fear of the Devourers. Species hid from each other, afraid to make noise that might attract the machines. But hiding doesn't solve problems. Fighting does. The weeks that followed the battle were busy with rescue and recovery operations. The scattered Devourer units were still dangerous, but they were no longer an unstoppable force. Human ships hunted down the surviving machines and destroyed them one by one. More importantly, the galaxy had learned something new about the species from Earth. Humans were not the strongest or smartest beings in the galaxy, but they were the ones who came when others called for help. They were the ones who stood and fought when everyone else ran away. In the new colonies in Andromeda, the rescued species began building something unprecedented. The Zalari shared their knowledge of art and philosophy. The Cathera contributed their engineering skills. The Sultani offered their understanding of ocean worlds. Each species added their own gifts to create a civilization built on cooperation instead of fear. At the center of it all were the humans, the species that had heard messages never meant for them and decided that hearing them was enough to make them responsible for answering them. They had proven that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up when someone needs help. The Devourers were not completely destroyed, but they would never again spread unchecked across the galaxy.